A baby was abandoned on a frozen doorstep. Then a Hell's Angel noticed the house was occupied. The cold that night had teeth. Marcus Viper Cole felt it cut through his leather jacket as he rode his Harley down Route 9, the headlight cutting a small, shaky tunnel through the dark. It was almost midnight. The chapter meeting had run long, full of arguments about dues and a supply run that had gone bad, and now his bones ached with the kind of tired that came from more than just a long day. His breath came out in white clouds inside his helmet. The wind bit at the strip of skin above his collar, and he hunched his shoulders against it, trying to keep the heat in. Most men his age would have taken the truck on a night like this, but Viper wasn't most men, and the bike was the only place he could think straight anymore. The engine's growl underneath him was steady, familiar, like an old friend that never asked questions. His mind wasn't on the road. Not really. It was on a date circled in red on the calendar hanging in his kitchen. Next week would mark 3 years since Dinah died. 3 years since the house on Cedar Street had gone quiet. Since he'd stopped hearing her humming while she cooked. Since the other side of the bed had turned cold and stayed that way. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He didn't talk about her much. The brothers knew better than to bring her up unless he did first. But this time of year, grief crawled up his throat like smoke, and no amount of throttle could outrun it. Should have called Patches, he muttered to himself, the words lost in the wind and the engine noise. Patches always knew what to say, or more often, when to say nothing at all, and just sit with him. But it was late, and Patches had his own family waiting for him at home, and Viper wasn't in the business of dragging other men into his sadness. The road stretched empty in front of him, the yellow lines swallowed up by the dark. Frost had turned the shoulder white, and above him the sky was a hard, clear black, stars sharp as needles. It was the kind of cold that made a man feel very small and very alone. He thought about turning up the radio in his helmet, some old country song to drown out his own head, but his hand never made it to the dial. Because that was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, some animal maybe, a fox or a bird startled out of its nest. He almost let it go. But the sound came again, thin and high and desperate, cutting through the growl of his engine in a way that no wind ever could. A baby's cry. Viper's whole body went rigid on the bike. He eased off the throttle, slowing until the Harley rumbled low and steady beneath him, and he strained his ears against the wind, trying to place where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be drifting from the left, from the narrow turnoff up ahead that the town called Miller's Lane. Nobody went down Miller's Lane anymore. The road was unplowed most winters, more pothole than pavement, and it led only to the old Miller house, a place folks in town had taken to calling the abandoned house for the better part of a year now. Boarded windows, grass gone wild and dead under the snow, a house nobody wanted to claim. But that cry had been real. He knew a baby's cry when he heard one, even after all these years, even with his own children grown and gone. It had been unmistakable, sharp and pleading, the kind of sound that didn't just tug at a man's ears but reached down into his chest and squeezed. He looked down the dark stretch of Route 9, the way home still miles ahead, warm bed and quiet grief waiting for him. Then he looked toward Miller's Lane, where the snow lay unbroken and the house sat black against the sky. No lights, no smoke, nothing. No sane man would turn down that road tonight. Viper's jaw tightened. He turned the handlebars, and the Harley's headlights swung across the dark, catching the reflective glint of the old street sign half buried in snow. He gave the engine some gas and rolled forward into the unplowed dark, toward the sound that would not let him go. The house came into view slowly, the way bad news always does. First the shape of it, black and hunched against the snow. Then the boarded windows, plywood gone gray with age. Then the porch, sagging on one side like an old man's shoulders. Viper cut the engine and let the quiet swallow him. The cry came again, closer now, and it sent a jolt through his chest that no amount of cold could touch. He swung his leg over the bike and parked it at the curb, or what he guessed was the curb under 3 feet of snow. The street hadn't been plowed all winter. His boots sank deep with every step, snow packing hard against his jeans, cold soaking through to his skin. He didn't slow down. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "Come on, come on." The yard was a mess of dead weeds poking up through the white, an old bicycle frame rusted and half-buried, a mailbox hanging crooked off its post like it had given up trying to stand straight. Nobody had touched this place in a year, not since the Millers packed up and left in a hurry, or so the story went. The whole town had made up their own version of what happened here. None of them had ever bothered to check. Viper reached the porch steps and took them 2 at a time, his heart hammering now, faster than the ride over had earned. The cry was right in front of him, thin and cracking, the kind of sound a baby makes when it doesn't have much crying left in it. And there it was, a car seat, sitting square in the middle of the porch, like someone had set it down real careful, real deliberate. Not dropped. Placed, a thin blanket, pale pink, wrapped around a small bundle inside. The baby's face was turned up toward the porch light that wasn't on, toward a sky that offered no warmth at all, and her lips had gone a color no lips should ever be. Blue, dusky, like a bruise spreading slow. "Hey, hey now." Viper dropped to his knees in front of the seat, his big hands trembling as he reached for the buckle. His fingers, thick and scarred from decades of engine grease and roadwork, fumbled with the tiny clasp. I got you, easy now." The baby's cry hitched, weaker than it should have been, and that scared him more than anything. A baby crying loud was a baby with fight left in her. A baby going quiet was a baby running out of time. He got the buckle loose and lifted her out, blanket and all, cradling her against his chest with the kind of care he hadn't used in years, not since his own kids were small enough to fit in one arm. She couldn't have been more than a few months old. Her tiny fists were curled up tight, her face scrunched and red where it wasn't blue, and she felt too light in his arms, too still. "No, no, no," he said, unzipping his leather jacket with one hand while he held her steady with the other. He tucked her against his flannel shirt, against the heat of his own body, and zipped the jacket back up around them both, leaving just her face peeking out into the cold air. His heart pounded against her tiny back like it could pump warmth into her through sound alone. That's it, hang on now." She let out a cry, weaker but real, and something in Viper's chest loosened just slightly. Not gone yet. Not gone. He turned to head back toward the bike, already running through what came next in his head. Blankets, the clubhouse, patches and his medical bag, anything to get her warm and checked over fast. But as he turned, something caught the corner of his eye. A flicker. Light, orange and moving, slipping through a narrow gap between 2 boards nailed over the front window. Firelight, and above the crooked chimney, barely visible against the black sky, a thin gray curl of smoke rose steady into the night. Viper's boots hit the porch boards hard, snow shaking loose from the roofline above him. He shifted the baby carefully to one arm, tucked deep against his chest, and pounded his fist on the front door. "Hey!" His voice cracked through the cold like a whip. "Somebody's fire is burning in there. I got a baby out here, near froze to death." "Open up, nothing." He pounded again, harder this time, the whole door shaking in its frame. "I know you're in there. I saw the smoke." Still nothing. Just the wind picking up behind him, cutting through the dead weeds in the yard, rattling what was left of an old porch swing hanging by one chain. Viper's jaw tightened. Whoever was in there, they'd left a baby out in weather that could kill her in under an hour. That kind of thing didn't leave much room for polite conversation. His mind ran through every bad possibility. Squatters strung out on something, somebody hiding from the law, somebody dangerous. He'd been in enough rough situations over the years to know better than to walk in blind. But the baby in his arms was proof enough that whatever was happening inside, it couldn't wait. He stepped back, planted his boot square against the door near the handle, and drove his heel forward. The wood splintered on the first hit. On the second, the frame gave way with a crack, and the door swung open into darkness, lit only by the dying orange glow of a small fire in the front room. Viper stepped inside fast, one arm curled protective around the baby, his other hand up and ready for whatever might come at him. What came at him instead was a scream. A young woman was crouched by the fireplace, wrapped in a ragged blanket, her whole body flinching backward like she'd been struck. She scrambled away from him, pressing herself into the corner between the fireplace and a broken-down couch, arms thrown up over her head. "Please," she said, voice raw and shaking. "Please, don't, please, I didn't mean to leave her long, I swear. I was gonna go right back out, I just needed a second, please don't hurt me." She was young. Couldn't have been more than 22, 23. Her face was thin, cheekbones sharp under skin gone pale from cold and something worse than cold. Her eyes were wide and wet, darting between Viper's face and his size, his leather vest, the patches on his chest that probably looked like every bad thing she'd ever been warned about. Viper stopped where he stood. He didn't move closer. He'd seen fear like that before, the kind that lived in a person's bones, and he knew charging at it only made it worse. "Easy," he said, low and steady, the same voice he used to calm a spooked horse or a rookie about to panic on a bad stretch of highway. "Easy now. Nobody's gonna hurt you." The woman didn't stop shaking. She stared at the baby tucked against his chest like she expected him to throw her, hurt her, take her and disappear into the night. Viper looked down at the baby's face, still pale, still cold, and carefully unzipped a few inches of his jacket. He shrugged one shoulder out of his leather vest, slow and deliberate, and draped it gentle over the baby's small body, tucking the edge up around her cheek like a blanket. "She's freezing," he said, keeping his voice soft. "I found her on your porch. I ain't here to hurt anybody." I heard her crying from the road. Something in the woman's face cracked. The fear didn't disappear, not all at once, but it shifted, folding into something else. Relief, maybe, or disbelief that help had actually come. "You heard her?" she whispered. "You actually heard her?" "Loud and clear," Viper said. "You're safe. Both of you. I promise you that." The woman's shoulders dropped. Her arms fell from over her head, and her whole body seemed to cave in on itself, folding forward as a sob tore loose from her throat. The kind of sob that had been held back too long, held back through cold and fear and hours of waiting for someone, anyone, to come. "Thank you," she cried, the words breaking apart as they left her. Thank you, oh God, thank you." Viper crossed the room slow, giving her space, and knelt by the fireplace. The fire had burned down to a few weak embers, more orange dust than flame. He grabbed a broken chair leg from a pile of scrap wood near the hearth and fed it to the coals. Then, another piece, blowing gentle at the base until the flames caught and climbed higher. Heat pushed back against the cold room, and he added 2 more pieces, building it up steady, not letting it smoke out. "There," he said, not looking at her, giving her a second to breathe without his eyes on her. "That'll hold for a while." Behind him, the woman's sobs had softened into shaky breaths. He heard her pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I didn't leave her," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out fast, like she'd been holding them back and they finally broke loose. "I need you to know that. I didn't just leave her out there." Viper turned his head, still crouched by the fire, and kept his voice even. "Okay." "I was pounding on that door for over an hour." Her voice cracked on every other word. "Maybe longer. I don't know. I lost track. My arms gave out. I couldn't hold her anymore, my hands wouldn't work right, they went numb, and I thought if I put her down and she cried loud enough, somebody would hear her before they saw me. I couldn't let anybody see me from the road. I couldn't." Viper's eyes flicked to the boarded windows, to the plywood covering what used to be a view of Miller's Lane. She'd been hiding. Not from cold, not from bad luck. From somebody. "So I set her down right by the door," Sierra went on, in her car seat, wrapped up as good as I could get her, "and I banged on that door until my knuckles bled. And nobody came. And nobody came. And I thought, maybe I killed her. Maybe I froze my own baby trying to keep us both safe. And I couldn't." Her voice gave out entirely, dissolving into a fresh wave of tears. "You didn't kill her," Viper said, firm now, cutting through the panic before it swallowed her whole. "She's warm. She's breathing fine. You hear her? She's not even crying anymore." As if on cue, a small snuffling sound came from the bundle against his chest, followed by quiet, even breathing. Sierra let out a broken laugh, half sob, half relief, pressing a shaking hand over her mouth. Viper stood, keeping the baby cradled careful in one arm, and reached for the radio clipped to his belt with the other. He thumbed it on, static crackling low. "Patches. Patches, you copy?" A pause, then a gravelly voice crackled back. "Copy, go ahead, Viper, I need you out at the old Miller place. Baby's cold, might be hypothermic, breathing's okay, but she needs looked at. Got a young woman here too, looks like she's been out in this weather a while. Bring blankets, bring the kit. On my way. 10 minutes. Viper clipped the radio back to his belt and looked down at Sierra, who was watching him now with a strange mix of fear and disbelief, like she still couldn't quite trust that any of this was real. "Help's coming," he said. "Doc from my club. Good man, knows what he's doing. You just sit tight, stay by that fire, get some warmth back in you." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter, her eyes dropping to the floor. Her jaw tightened, like she was building a wall back up brick by brick. "Who were you hiding from?" Viper asked gently, though he already had a bad feeling settling low in his gut. Sierra shook her head, quick and sharp. "I can't. Not yet. I was running from someone. That's all I can say right now." Viper studied her a long moment, the firelight flickering across her thin, frightened face, and decided not to push. Whatever had put that kind of fear in her, it wasn't going anywhere tonight. There'd be time for the rest of it. "All right," he said quietly. "All right. Just get warm." The fire cracked and popped, filling the small room with warmth it hadn't known in months. Viper stayed standing near the hearth, rocking the baby just slightly out of old habit, though he hadn't held an infant since Caleb was small. The motion came back to him without thinking, like his body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. Sierra sat curled on the dusty floor, knees pulled to her chest, blanket wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. She stared into the flames like she was looking for something in them, some answer that wasn't there. Viper watched her for a moment before he spoke again. He kept his voice low, careful, the same tone he used to calm a spooked horse or a rookie rider before their first long haul. "I'm not going to push you," he said, "but I need to know something." She didn't look up. "What, is somebody coming after you tonight? Right now?" "Because if there is, I need to know so I can protect you and that baby." "That's it. That's all I'm asking." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire and the baby's soft breathing against his chest. "He doesn't know I'm here," Sierra said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think he does. I made sure. I switched cars. I didn't use my phone. I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I didn't even know where I was going. Not really. Until I remembered this place." "How'd you know about this place?" Sierra's eyes flicked up to his, then away just as fast. "He mentioned it once, a long time ago. Said it was some kind of old family property, said nobody ever came out here anymore. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't have money, I didn't have people. I just remembered him saying it, and I drove until I found it." Viper's stomach turned slow and cold, though he couldn't yet say why. He told himself it was nothing. Half the county probably knew this house sat empty, condemned looking, forgotten by everyone except the bank that owned the note on it. "This man," Viper said carefully, "the one you're running from, he hurt you?" Sierra's hand drifted to her ribs without her seeming to notice she'd done it, pressing lightly against her side like an old bruise was still tender there. She didn't answer right away. "He used to be different," she said instead, her voice cracking again. "When I met him, he was funny. He made me feel like somebody actually wanted me around, you know? I grew up in the system, bounced around foster homes since I was 6. Nobody ever picked me. Not really. And then he did. Or he made it seem like he did." Viper stayed quiet, letting her get there in her own time, the way he'd learned to do with skittish new prospects who'd seen too much before they ever came to the club. "It got bad slow," Sierra whispered. "Not all at once. First, it was just words. Then it was grabbing my arm too hard. Then it was worse than that. Last week She stopped, swallowed hard, shook her head like she couldn't finish the sentence. I knew if I didn't leave, one of these times he wasn't gonna stop. And I couldn't let that happen. Not with her in the house. Not with Hope." "Hope?" Viper repeated softly, glancing down at the small face tucked against his jacket. "That... her name?" Sierra nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks again, though quieter now, steadier. "Hope Cole," she said. "That's her name." Viper's whole body went still. "His name," Viper said, his voice suddenly rough, careful, like he already knew and was praying he was wrong. The man you're running from. What's his name? Sierra looked up at him then. Really looked. Like she was searching his face for some sign of danger, some reason not to trust him after all. But something in his eyes must have told her she was safe, because she finally let the name loose. Caleb, she whispered. Caleb Cole. The color drained clean out of Viper's face. His hand shot out, gripping the splintered doorframe beside him hard enough that his knuckles went white, the old wood groaning faintly under his grip. The baby stirred against his chest, but didn't wake. Outside, twin beams of headlights swept slow across the boarded windows as Patches's truck rolled up the gravel drive. The door banged open, and Patches came in fast, the way he always moved when there was trouble, quick but sure, no wasted steps. He was a big man, built like a door himself, with a gray beard and hands that had patched up more road wounds than most hospitals saw in a year. He took one look at Viper standing frozen by the fire, at Sierra huddled on the floor, and didn't ask questions. He just got to work. "Give her here," Patches said, nodding at the baby, and Viper handed Hope over without thinking, his arms strangely empty once she was gone. Patches cradled her expert and gentle, checking her fingers, her toes, pressing the back of his hand to her cheek and her chest. "She's cold, but she's pinking up," he said. "Lips aren't blue anymore. Breathing's good. We got to her in time." He glanced over at Sierra. "You, let me see your hands." Sierra held them out, shaking, and Patches wrapped his big fingers around hers, feeling for the chill under her skin. Cold, but not frostbit. "You did good keeping her wrapped the way you did. Probably saved her life." Sierra let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for hours. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "You did right," Patches said again, firm. The same voice he used on rattled riders after a bad wreck. "Both of you are gonna be okay." Viper hadn't moved from the doorframe. His hand was still pressed against the splintered wood, and his face had the look of a man who'd been hit but hadn't fallen down yet, too stunned to know how bad the damage really was. "Sierra," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "I need to ask you something else, and I need you to think hard before you answer." She looked up at him, wary again, the way she'd been when he first kicked in the door. "This house," Viper said slowly. "Nobody around here knows I own it. Not the neighbors, not the town, nobody. I bought it years back under a different name, kept it quiet on purpose. So how'd Caleb know about it? How'd he know to tell you to come here?" Sierra's face went pale. She looked down at the baby in Patches's arms, then back up at Viper, like she was trying to piece something together that scared her more than the cold ever had. "He said it was family property," she said again, her voice shaking harder now. "He said his dad had it a long time ago. Said nobody used it anymore, that it was just sitting out here empty. He told me if things ever got bad, if I ever needed to disappear for a while, I should come here. He said nobody would ever think to look." The fire popped loud in the silence that followed. Viper felt something cold crawl up the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the winter air still leaking in through the broken window. "His dad," Viper repeated, barely above a whisper. Sierra's hands were trembling so bad now she could hardly hold on to the blanket. She reached instead for the bag at her side, the same worn canvas bag she'd been clutching since Viper first found her, and dug through it with shaking fingers until she pulled out a small stack of papers, creased soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. "I have to show you something," she said, and her voice broke apart completely, the sobs coming now in short, gasping waves. "I should have told you right away. I was just so scared. I didn't know if I could trust you. I didn't know if you were going to hurt us, too." She held out a photograph first, edges worn soft and gray from handling. Then, underneath it, a folded piece of paper, official-looking, the kind of paper hospitals hand out. "Her birth certificate," Sierra whispered, pushing it toward him with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Look at the name." Viper took it slow, like it might burn him, and unfolded the paper with fingers that had gone numb. There, printed clean and official in the space for the child's last name, were 3 letters that knocked the air clean out of his chest. Cole, the paper shook in Viper's hand, but he didn't let it fall. He just stared at those 3 letters until they blurred together, until the fire and the room and everything else went quiet around him. Cole. His name. His blood. A granddaughter he never knew existed, born to a woman his own son had put in danger. "Give me a minute," he said, and his voice came out cracked, like something inside him had shifted loose. He looked down at Hope, still cradled against Patches's chest, and for the first time he let himself really see her. The dark hair. The stubborn set of her tiny jaw, so much like Dinah's used to be when she was fixed on something. His wife would have known in an instant. She always saw things faster than he did. Patches caught his eye over the baby's head, a question there that didn't need words. Viper gave a small nod, barely anything, but enough. Patches understood. He kept working, kept his hands steady, kept his voice low, and even as the weight of what had just been said settled heavy in the room. "Sierra," Patches said gently, turning his attention back to her. "I need you to tell me if you're hurt anywhere else, anywhere besides your hands." She flinched at the question, just barely, but Patches caught it, the way a man who'd seen plenty of hurt people always caught those small tells. "My ribs," she admitted, so quiet it almost didn't carry over the fire. "And my arm. He grabbed me hard the last time. Left marks. Can I look?" Patches asked, careful, giving her the choice. She nodded, and pulled back her sleeve enough to show a bruise blooming dark and ugly along her forearm. Fingers pressed so hard they'd left marks shaped like a hand. Viper's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything, but something in his chest went cold, and still. The kind of stillness that came right before a storm. "How long?" he asked. Not really a question, more like he already knew the answer, and just needed to hear it out loud. Sierra's eyes filled up again, tears spilling over before she could stop them. "Months," she whispered. "It started small, just yelling at first. Then he'd grab my arm too hard, or shove me into a wall when he got mad. I kept telling myself it would get better. I kept thinking if I just didn't make him angry, if I was careful enough." Her voice broke apart completely. Then, 2 nights ago, he said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I never saw Hope again. He said things that scared me worse than anything he'd ever done before. So I packed what I could, and I ran. I didn't know where else to go. The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fire and Hope's small, sleepy breaths against Patches's shoulder. Viper stood there a long moment, feeling something rebuild itself inside him. brick by brick, out of the wreckage Caleb had left behind. He thought of his son as a boy, small and scared of thunderstorms, climbing into Viper's lap during summer storms. He thought about what happened between then and now, all the years he hadn't been paying close enough attention, all the ways he might have failed to stop this before it ever started. But there would be time to sort through that guilt later. Right now, there were two people in this room who needed him to be steady, not broken. He crossed the room and knelt down in front of Sierra, bringing himself level with her instead of standing over her the way Caleb probably always had. He wanted her to see him, not loom above her. "Listen to me," he said, low and rough, but steady as bedrock. "Whatever happens next, whatever it takes, you and that baby are never going to be unprotected again. Not for one single night. Not while I'm still breathing." He reached for the leather vest hanging off his shoulders, the one bearing the patch that meant something to men who'd bled for it, and he pulled it off, laying it careful and deliberate over Sierra's shoulders like a blanket, like a shield. "You're under my roof now," he said. "You're under my patch. That means something. Ask anybody who knows me." Sierra looked up at him, tears still wet on her face, but something in her eyes had shifted. Something like the first thin edge of trust. "Patches," Viper said, standing back up, voice hardening now with purpose. "Get them both to my place tonight. Warm beds, hot food, whatever they need." He looked back down at the birth certificate still in his hand, at those 3 letters that had changed everything. "I've got my own family business to deal with." Viper barely slept that night. He sat up in the old recliner at the Miller's Lane house, keeping watch while Sierra and Hope slept in the back room, the fire dying down to embers by the time gray light started creeping through the boarded windows. His mind kept circling back to that birth certificate, folded now in his shirt pocket, close to his chest. He hadn't shown it to anybody else. Not yet. By the time the sun was fully up, he'd made his decision. He wasn't leaving them here another night. This house had a hole in the roof over the kitchen and a chimney that didn't draw right, and no place for a baby to be safe and warm. His own house, out on the edge of town, had good bones and empty rooms that hadn't held anybody since Dinah passed. It was time they held somebody again. He knocked soft on the bedroom door before pushing it open. Sierra was already awake, sitting up with Hope against her chest, eyes rimmed red from a night that hadn't given her much rest either. "Morning," Viper said, keeping his voice low and even. "I want you and the baby to come stay at my place, just till we get things sorted out. It's warm. It's got a real kitchen, a crib Patches is bringing over this morning. You'll be safe there." Sierra's arms tightened slightly around Hope, a reflex more than a decision. "I don't want to be any trouble," she said. "You're not trouble," Viper said. "You're family. Whether either one of us is ready for that word yet or not, it's true. Now come on. Let's get you both somewhere warm." She didn't argue further, just nodded, and gathered the few things she had. Viper carried the car seat out to his truck himself, careful with it like it might break, and helped Sierra climb into the passenger seat before securing Hope in the back. The drive out of town was quiet, the fields still dusted with old snow, smoke curling up from chimneys they passed. Sierra kept her eyes on the window, watching the world go by like she still wasn't sure any of this was real. Viper's house sat at the end of a gravel road, a squat 2-story place with a wraparound porch and a barn out back where he kept his tools and spare parts. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, and it was warm. When he pulled up the drive, Sierra just stared at it for a long moment before saying anything. "This is really where you live," she said. Not quite a question. "Been here almost 20 years, Viper said. "My wife and I bought it before Caleb was born." He didn't say more than that, and Sierra didn't ask. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and coffee, clean but sparse. A bachelor's home that hadn't changed much in 3 years of grief. Viper showed her to a bedroom upstairs, already made up with fresh sheets he'd put on that morning before heading out to get her. Patches had dropped off a crib sometime while they were gone, set up in the corner, still in its plastic wrapping half torn away. Sierra flinched when the screen door banged shut behind them in the wind, spinning around fast, arms curling protective around Hope. Viper didn't move closer. He just stood still, hands loose at his sides, and let her catch her breath. "It's just the wind," he said quietly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here. Not while I'm around." She nodded, though her shoulders stayed tight for a long while after. That evening, Hope started fussing in her crib, a thin cry that built quick into something more urgent. Sierra was in the shower, the first real one she'd had in days, and Viper found himself standing alone in the kitchen, holding a bottle and a can of formula like they were foreign objects he'd never seen before. He fumbled with the instructions, squinting at the tiny print, dumping too much powder in the first try and having to pour it out and start over. The water wouldn't come out the right temperature, first too hot, then too cold, until he finally got it just warm enough, testing a few drops against his wrist the way he vaguely remembered seeing somebody do decades ago. By the time Sierra came down, hair still damp, Viper was standing over the crib with the bottle in hand, feeling more nervous than he had in years, waiting to see if he'd gotten it right. The word got around town faster than a grease fire. It started at Pearl's Diner, the way most things did in a town that small. Old Man Jenkins saw Viper's truck pull up to the pharmacy with a young woman in the front seat and a baby carrier in the back. And by the time he'd finished his coffee, he'd told 3 people at the counter. By lunchtime, the whole diner was buzzing. "You hear about that Hell's Angel? Got some girl living with him now. Young thing too. Baby and all. My cousin saw them at the grocery store Tuesday. Well, you know how those biker types are. Probably not even his own kid. I heard she doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Where else was she gonna go?" Nobody said it outright, but the whispers carried a shape anyway. The shape of judgment dressed up as concern. Nobody asked Viper directly. Nobody asked Sierra at all. They just talked, the way small towns do, filling in the blanks with whatever story felt most satisfying. At the grocery store, the cashier who used to smile at Viper when he came through with his usual order of coffee and canned soup now watched him with a tight, curious look, eyes flicking to the baby formula and diapers in his cart like she was cataloging evidence. He noticed. He always noticed. But he kept his jaw set and his voice polite, because raising a fuss would only feed the fire hotter. Sierra didn't know about any of it at first. She'd been too busy learning the rhythm of the house, the way Hope liked to be rocked just so, the particular creak of the 3rd stair that Viper always warned her about. She was healing, slow and careful, like a bone that had been broken and was only just starting to knit back together. It was a Thursday when it caught up to her. She'd gone into town with Viper to pick up a prescription for Hope's ear infection, waiting at the pharmacy counter while he filled the truck with gas across the street. 2 women stood a few feet away by the greeting card rack, close enough that their voices carried even though they clearly thought they were being quiet. That's her. The one staying with the biker. Lord, she can't be more than 20. What's she doing shacked up with a man his age? I heard she doesn't even have a place of her own. Just showed up out of nowhere with that baby, probably running from something. These girls always are. Sierra's face went hot, then cold. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, Hope's prescription bag crinkling in her fist. She didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, feeling smaller and smaller, like the whole store was shrinking down around her, every whisper another wall closing in. By the time Viper pulled up outside, she was already standing on the curb, Hope's carrier gripped tight in both hands, eyes fixed on the pavement. The ride home was silent. Viper glanced over more than once, reading the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her face turned toward the window. He didn't push. He'd learned that much already, that pushing only made her fold in tighter. It wasn't until they were back at the house, Hope down for her nap, that Sierra finally spoke. She stood in the kitchen doorway, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "They think I'm trash," she said, voice thin. "Those women at the pharmacy. They think I'm some kind of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes filled, and she blinked hard, angry at herself for the tears. Viper set down the coffee mug he'd been holding and turned to face her fully. He didn't come closer, just let his voice do the work, steady and low. "Listen to me," he said. "Those women don't know you. They don't know what you've survived, what you've done to keep that little girl safe and warm. They're just talking to hear themselves talk. That's all gossip ever is." Sierra shook her head, arms tightening around her own ribs. "But what if they're right? What if I really am just—" "You're not," Viper said, firm now, cutting her off gentle but sure. "Whatever they think, whatever they say over their coffee and their greeting cards, none of it decides who you are. Only you get to decide that. And I've watched you these past weeks. I know exactly who you are." Sierra stood by the truck for a long moment, not moving, just staring at the building in front of her. The Iron Cross clubhouse wasn't much to look at. A long metal building with a gravel lot, motorcycles lined up out front like soldiers standing at attention. A faded sign hung crooked above the door. Somewhere inside, low voices rumbled, and a radio played classic rock. "You don't have to do this," Viper said, watching her face. "We can turn around right now." Sierra shook her head, though her hands trembled as she unbuckled Hope's carrier. "No. If I'm going to be around them, they need to see me." "See her." She glanced down at the baby who was chewing on her own fist, oblivious to the nerves swirling around her. "I just don't know what they're going to think." "They'll think whatever they think," Viper said, "but nobody in there is going to hurt you. That much I promise." He held the door for her, and the moment they stepped inside, the noise dropped like someone had thrown a switch. 6 or 7 men sat around a scarred pool table and a row of folding chairs, beers in hand, leather vests creaking as they turned to look. Big men, tattooed men, men with beards down to their chests and scars that told stories nobody asked about. Every single one of them went quiet, eyes locking onto the young woman clutching a car seat like a shield. Sierra's grip tightened on the handle. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Nobody said anything. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. broken only by the tinny sound of the radio and the hum of an old refrigerator in the corner. One of the men, a mountain of a guy with a shaved head and a chain wallet, crossed his arms. "This the girl?" he asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "This is Sierra," Viper said, his voice carrying an edge that dared anyone to make it a problem. "And this is Hope." More silence. A couple of the men exchanged glances. Sierra felt her face flush, felt every old fear rising up in her chest, the same feeling she'd had standing in the pharmacy while those women picked her apart with their eyes. Then, Patches stood up from his chair by the pool table. He was older than the rest, gray streaking through his beard, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He crossed the room slow, like he had all the time in the world, and stopped right in front of Sierra. For a second, she thought he might say something harsh, might confirm every fear she carried. Instead, he knelt down. Right there on the concrete floor, knees popping, he lowered himself to eye level with the car seat and peered inside at Hope with a grin spreading across his weathered face. "Well, hello there, little miss," he said, voice suddenly soft as a lullaby. "Aren't you just the prettiest thing to walk through that door in 20 years? Hope blinked up at him, startled by the new face, then let out a gummy, drooly smile, kicking her feet against the blanket. Patches let out a laugh, deep and warm, like something breaking open. "Would you look at that? She likes me, already." He glanced up at the other men, still frozen in their seats. "Well, don't just sit there like a bunch of lumps. Somebody get this girl a chair." That broke it. Like ice cracking on a spring lake, the tension shattered all at once. Chairs scraped back. One of the younger prospects hustled over with a folding chair, setting it down for Sierra like she was royalty. Another disappeared into the back and returned with a can of soda, holding it out to her with an awkward, boyish grin. "You need anything for the baby, you just holler," said the big man with the shaved head, his gruff voice softening as he peered at Hope over Patches's shoulder. "We got tools. We got hands. We can build whatever she needs." By the time an hour had passed, 3 different bikers had crowded around Hope's carrier, taking turns making faces at her, competing to see who could get the biggest laugh. One offered to fix up an old crib he had in his garage. Another mentioned his sister ran a daycare and could help with formula. Sierra sat in her folding chair, soda sweating in her hand, watching the room full of leather and tattoos melt into something she never expected. Something like family. Viper waited until Sierra and Hope were settled at home, safe with Patches keeping watch on the porch, before he climbed onto his bike and rode into the part of town he'd been avoiding for a year. The address was easy enough to remember. Ricky Bones Alvarez had been Caleb's closest friend back when the two of them ran together as prospects, back before everything went sideways. Bones still lived in the same run-down apartment complex on the east side, the kind of place where the paint peeled in long strips and somebody's dog barked non-stop behind a chain-link fence. Viper knocked twice. When Bones opened the door, his eyes went wide. "Viper," he said, like he'd seen a ghost. "Man, it's been a while. Can I come in?" Bones hesitated, then stepped back and let him through. The apartment was small and cluttered, dishes stacked in the sink, a television playing some cop show nobody was watching. "This about Caleb?" Bones asked, dropping onto a worn couch and gesturing for Viper to sit. Yeah, Viper stayed standing. Somehow it felt wrong to sit down for this conversation, like sitting would make it too comfortable. "I need to understand what happened to him. After the club kicked him out, Where'd he go? Who'd he start running with? Bones rubbed the back of his neck, not meeting Viper's eyes. You sure you want to hear this? I'm sure. Bones sighed. After the club dropped him, man, he took it hard. Real hard. He kept saying it wasn't fair, that the theft thing was blown out of proportion, that you all turned your backs on him too fast. Bones shrugged. I don't know if that's true or not. Wasn't my call to make. But he was angry. Real angry. Go on. He started hanging around this crew out past the old guys who ain't in no club, just guys who like trouble. They drink hard, they don't answer to nobody. Caleb started drinking with them most nights. Then, it wasn't just nights. Bones finally looked up. Last time I saw him, 6 months back, he could barely stand up straight at 2 in the afternoon. I tried talking to him. He told me to mind my own business. Viper felt something cold settle in his stomach. Did you ever see him get violent before Sierra? Bones was quiet for a long moment. There was a girl before her. I don't know all the details. But I heard things. I always figured it was drink talking, making him mean. I didn't think. He trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't think it'd get this bad. Viper thanked him and left, the words following him out the door like smoke. He rode to 2 more places that night. An old prospect named Dutch, who'd shared a bunk with Caleb during a rundown to Texas years back, and a woman named Peggy, who used to tend bar where the mill crew drank. Both stories matched up close enough. Caleb, cut loose from the only structure he'd ever known, drifting toward men who offered him belonging without any of the discipline. The bottle filling in for the guidance nobody gave him anymore. By the time Viper got home, the house on Miller's Lane was dark and quiet. Sierra and Hope long asleep upstairs. He sat alone in the kitchen, the old wood chair creaking under him, a cup of coffee going cold between his hands. He thought about the way he'd raised Caleb. Hard lessons, quick punishments, never much room for excuses. He'd thought that was strength. He'd thought that was what a boy needed to become a man worth respecting. But strength without warmth wasn't strength. It was just weight, and maybe he'd loaded so much weight onto his son's shoulders that when the club cut him loose, there was nothing left holding him together. Viper pressed his palms against his eyes, elbows on the table, the silence of the house pressing in around him. Had he done this? Had his own hardness, his own coldness after Dinah died, driven Caleb toward men who only knew how to destroy things? He didn't have an answer. He only had the guilt, sitting heavy in his chest like a stone that wouldn't move, no matter how long he sat there turning it over in his mind. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter, the good kind of smell that made a house feel lived in. Viper had made spaghetti, nothing fancy, just noodles and sauce from a jar and some bread he'd warmed in the oven. It was the kind of meal Dinah used to call survival food, something you made when you didn't have the energy for anything more complicated. But Sierra had eaten 2 full plates, and that alone made Viper feel like he'd done something right. Hope was down for the night, tucked into the crib Patches had helped set up in the room next to Sierra's. The baby monitor sat on the table between them, a small red light blinking steady, the soft static hiss the only sound besides their forks scraping against the plates. "This is good," Sierra said, tearing off a piece of bread. "Better than anything I made for myself the last few months. Wasn't hard, just noodles." Still, she smiled a little, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Viper had learned to notice that. The smiles that were real and the ones that were just armor, put on so people would leave her alone. He didn't push. He'd learned that too, these last few weeks. Pushing only made her curl up tighter, like a hand closing around something fragile. So he just ate. Let the silence sit there comfortable instead of heavy. And waited. It was Sierra who finally spoke again. Her voice quieter now. "You want to know how I ended up with someone like Caleb?" Viper set his fork down. "Only if you want to tell me." She was quiet for a moment, turning her water glass in slow circles on the table. "I grew up in foster care. Started when I was 4. My mom couldn't keep it together, and there wasn't anybody else." She said it plain, like a fact she'd repeated so many times it didn't hurt to say anymore. But Viper had been around enough pain to know that wasn't true. It still hurt. She'd just gotten good at hiding it. "I went through 11 homes before I turned 18, she continued. Some were fine, some weren't. Nobody ever hit me or anything like that. Mostly, it wasn't that kind of bad. It was just, nobody ever wanted to keep me. I was always the kid nobody picked. Foster families would take in the babies, the cute little ones, and they'd tolerate me until something better came along." She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "I used to pack my bag before they even told me I was leaving, just so I'd be ready." Viper felt his chest tighten. He thought of Caleb as a boy, running around the yard, always sure of his place in the world even when Viper was too hard on him. Sierra never had that. Not even the hard version. "When I met Caleb," she said, "he made me feel like I mattered. He'd remember little things. What I liked. What scared me. He'd show up when he said he would. That doesn't sound like much, but for me, that was everything. Nobody had ever done that before. Not once." "He was good at that," Viper said quietly. "Making people feel like they mattered. He learned it somewhere. It didn't last," Sierra said. "The version of him that showed up for me those first few months. That wasn't real. Or maybe it was real, and it just wasn't strong enough to survive whatever's broken in him." She shook her head. "I don't know. I spent so long trying to figure out which parts of him were true." Viper nodded slowly. He thought about Bones, about the mill crew, about the bottle filling in where nobody else stepped up. Sierra had needed somebody to choose her, and Caleb had needed somebody to tell him he still mattered after the club cut him loose. Two people needing the same thing, finding each other in all the wrong ways. "You didn't do anything wrong," Viper said. "Wanting somebody to want you. That's not a flaw, Sierra. That's just being human." She looked up at him, something uncertain flickering across her face. "You really believe that? I've got a patch on my vest that says I ride with a bunch of grown men who still get emotional over a good breakfast burrito," Viper said. "Trust me, wanting to be wanted is the least embarrassing thing in this house." Sierra blinked, and then she laughed. Really laughed, the sound bursting out of her before she could stop it, surprised and bright and real. It cracked something open in her face, softened the guarded set of her shoulders, and for a moment she looked less like a woman bracing for the next blow, and more like the 22-year-old she actually was. Viper woke before the sun that Saturday, the way he always did when there was work to do. He stood in his kitchen drinking black coffee, looking out the window at the frost on the grass, and thought about the house on Miller's Lane. That house had been a place of fear for Sierra, a place where she'd huddled by a dying fire, arms wrapped around hope, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice the smoke curling from the chimney. Viper wanted to change that. He wanted the house to mean something different now. Not a hiding place. A home. He called Patches first. "I need bodies," Viper said into the phone. "New windows, a real roof, paint, the whole thing." "You in? When have I ever said no to you?" Patches answered, and Viper could hear him already grabbing his keys. By 7 that morning, 6 trucks sat parked along Miller's Lane, engines ticking as they cooled. Big men in leather vests climbed out carrying ladders, tool belts, cans of paint, rolls of insulation. Tiny Wallace, who stood at 6'5" and had a laugh that could rattle windows, hauled a stack of plywood over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. Duke and Snapper argued good-naturedly about whether the roof needed new trusses or just new shingles. Patches directed traffic like he'd done this 100 times, which, in the club, he practically had. Viper stood on the porch where he'd first found hope, looking at the boarded windows, the peeling paint, the sagging gutter. He remembered how cold it had been that night, how small the baby's cry had sounded against the wind. "All right," he said, raising his voice so the whole crew could hear. "This isn't just a job. This is for her." Sierra's spent her whole life in places that were falling apart, places nobody bothered to fix. We're gonna give her one that's whole. Something she can look at and know somebody cared enough to make it right. The men nodded, quiet for a moment, and then the work began. The morning passed in a blur of hammers and saws. Old plywood came down from the windows, tossed into a pile in the yard. New glass went up, clean and clear, letting sunlight pour into rooms that hadn't seen it in months. On the roof, Duke and Snapper tore off rotted shingles while Tiny passed up bundles of new ones, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold January air. Patches worked inside, patching drywall, sanding down the walls in the room that would become the nursery. By early afternoon, 3 men were up on ladders painting the outside a soft, warm yellow, the color Sierra had once mentioned offhand, the color of her grandmother's kitchen from the one good year she remembered in foster care. Viper had listened. He always listened, even when he pretended he wasn't paying attention. Inside, in the small room next to what would be Sierra's, a crib sat half-assembled on the floor. 2 brothers, both built like refrigerators, knelt over the instructions with furrowed brows, muttering about which bolt went where. It would have looked funny to anyone passing by. 2 Hell's Angels in leather vests hunched over baby furniture, squinting at diagrams meant for parents half their size. But there was nothing funny in the careful way they worked, checking each screw twice, making sure every edge was smooth and safe. Sierra arrived just as the sun began sinking low, casting the house in gold light. She stepped out of Viper's truck slowly, Hope balanced on her hip, and stopped at the end of the walkway. The house she remembered, the house of splintered wood and broken windows and fear, was gone. In its place stood something bright and solid. New glass caught the last of the sunlight. Fresh paint gleamed, warm and soft, the color of comfort. And through the open door she could see them, big rough men with tattoos and vests, laughing together over a half-built crib, arguing about whether the mattress went in before or after the mobile. Sierra's breath caught. Her eyes filled, and one tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Viper stepped up beside her, quiet, not saying anything, just letting her look. "They did all this," she whispered, "for us?" 2 weeks later, the Iron Cross clubhouse looked nothing like itself. Instead of motorcycles lined up in neat rows, The gravel lot was filled with folding tables. Boxes of diapers stacked shoulder high. Bags of baby clothes, some still with tags on them, sorted by size. A donated crib, still in its box, leaned against the wall next to a stack of blankets soft as clouds. Patches had come up with the idea first. "There's a family over on Cooper Street," he'd told Viper one night, wiping grease off his hands after working on a bike. Young mom, 3 kids, husband walked out. "She's got nothing. I figure if we can do it for Sierra and Hope, we can do it for somebody else too." Viper hadn't hesitated. "Make some calls." Word spread fast through the club, and faster through the town. A donation drive, organized by the Hells Angels. People didn't quite know what to make of it at first. Some folks whispered that it was some kind of trick, or a tax write-off, or a stunt for good press. But then the boxes started coming in, from the grocery store, from the church down the road, from strangers who just showed up with bags of clothes and no explanation at all. Sierra stood behind one of the folding tables, sorting through a box of tiny sweaters, checking sizes, folding them into neat piles. Hope sat nearby in her car seat, gnawing on a teething ring, watching the bustle of activity with wide, curious eyes. Sierra had surprised herself by volunteering to help organize everything. A few months ago, she wouldn't have been able to stand in public like this, exposed, watched, but something had shifted in her. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had a home. She had people around her who cared. And when Patches had asked if she wanted to help sort the donations, she'd said yes before she could talk herself out of it. "You're a natural at this," Patches said, setting down another box beside her. "Better than half the guys here." Duke tried to fold a onesie into a shirt for a grown man earlier. Sierra laughed, a real laugh, light and easy. "It's not hard. You just have to actually look at the tag." Apparently that's a foreign concept to bikers. She smiled and kept working, running her fingers over a soft yellow blanket before folding it and setting it in the pile. Around her, the parking lot buzzed with activity. Big men who looked like they belonged on the highway instead were carefully organizing bottles by size, checking off donation lists, carrying boxes with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who didn't know them. That was when Sierra noticed a small cluster of women approaching from across the lot. She recognized them immediately, and her stomach tightened. They were from town, the same women who used to watch her at the grocery store with narrowed eyes, the same ones who whispered behind their hands whenever she walked by with Hope, wondering out loud what kind of girl ends up living with a biker gang. Sierra straightened her back, bracing herself for whatever judgment they'd come to deliver. But the woman in front, a heavyset woman named Carol who ran the flower shop on Main Street, stopped in front of the table and folded her hands together, looking almost nervous. "We heard about the drive," Carol said. "We wanted to help. And..." She hesitated, glancing at the other 2 women beside her before continuing. "We wanted to say we're sorry for how we talked about you." It wasn't fair. Sierra blinked, caught completely off guard. "We didn't know your story," said the younger woman beside Carol, twisting a tissue in her hands. "We just saw a girl living with the Hells Angels and made up our own version of it. That was wrong of us." The third woman, older, with silver hair pulled back in a bun, stepped forward and set a bag down on the table. "Diapers and formula," she said quietly. "And if you ever need someone to watch Hope for an hour so you can rest, my number's on the bag. I raised 4 kids of my own. I know how tired you must be." Sierra felt her throat tighten, tears rising unexpectedly. She looked past the women, at the lot full of bikers sorting donations with careful hands, at Hope babbling happily in her car seat, at Patches grinning as he wrestled with a stroller he couldn't quite figure out how to fold. The town that once judged her was standing in front of her now, offering help instead of gossip. "Thank you," Sierra said softly. "That means more than you know." The house on Miller's Lane didn't look like the same place anymore. Gone were the boarded windows and the sagging porch steps. Fresh white paint covered the walls. Bright against the green of the yard Viper had spent weeks clearing. String lights zigzagged across the porch ceiling, glowing warm even though the sun hadn't fully set. Someone, probably Duke, had tied balloons to the mailbox, and they bobbed lazily in the evening breeze. Viper stood in the doorway, looking at it all, and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, maybe, or peace. "You just gonna stand there? Or you gonna help me carry this cake inside?" Patches grumbled behind him, holding a sheet cake with both hands, careful not to tilt it. Viper snorted and took the cake from him. "You didn't let Duke near the frosting this time, did you?" "Made him stand in the corner like a kid in timeout," Patches said. Man cannot be trusted with a piping bag. Inside, the house buzzed with noise and laughter. Folding chairs lined the living room, though most people were standing, cups of lemonade and sweet tea in hand. A banner hung across the fireplace, hand-painted in uneven letters that read Happy Gotcha Day, Hope. Sierra had made it herself, sitting at the kitchen table 2 nights ago, with paint on her fingers and a soft smile on her face the whole time. It was the fireplace that mattered most. The same one Viper had knelt in front of a year ago, pulling a screaming baby into his arms while a dying fire sputtered behind cracked plywood. Now it crackled warm and steady, logs stacked neat. No more holes in the walls to let the winter in. Hope sat in the middle of the living room floor on a blanket, wearing a tiny paper crown that kept slipping over her eyes. She squealed every time someone leaned down to boop her nose, which happened often, since half the Iron Cross chapter seemed to have appointed themselves her personal entertainment committee. "She's getting big," Carol said, standing near the window with a plate of cookies in her hand. She'd come with her husband, both of them a little stiff and unsure at first, but the stiffness had melted away within the first 10 minutes. Mostly thanks to Duke showing off a magic trick with a quarter that made Hope laugh so hard she hiccuped. 11 months next week, Sierra said, coming to stand beside Carol. She looked different than she had a year ago. Steadier, her cheeks had color in them now, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes. "I can't believe it's been a year." "Feels like she's always been here," Carol said, watching as one of the bikers, a mountain of a man named Tiny, sat cross-legged on the floor, letting Hope grab fistfuls of his beard. Sierra laughed. Careful, Tiny might let her win at arm wrestling before she's 2. Across the room, Viper watched it all unfold. Bikers and townsfolk mingling like they'd always known each other. The line between the two blurred, until it barely mattered. Judge Harmon stood near the kitchen, chatting easily with 2 members of the club about fishing, of all things. Someone had put music on, something soft and old, and a few couples swayed near the corner where the record player sat. Sierra made her way over to him, weaving through the crowd, holding 2 cups of lemonade. She handed him one. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this." Viper shook his head. "Didn't do it alone." "No," Sierra agreed, looking around the room at Patches wrestling with Hope's crown, at Carol laughing with Duke, at the fireplace glowing warm and steady. But you started it. All of it. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were shining, though she was smiling too. I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, she said, her voice catching slightly. But you're not just someone who helped me. You're not just Hope's grandfather on paper. She took a breath, like she was gathering courage. You're family. Real family. The kind I never thought I'd get. Viper felt his throat tighten, and for once he didn't try to hide it. Yeah, he said quietly. You are too. Behind them, Hope let out a delighted shriek as her paper crown finally slipped off entirely, and the whole room erupted in laughter. The last of the cars pulled away from Miller's Lane a little after 10. Duke had left with a piece of leftover cake wrapped in a napkin, and Carol had hugged Sierra twice before finally letting her husband walk her to the truck. The string lights on the porch still glowed, but the house had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after a good day, warm and tired. Viper was in the kitchen helping Patches stack folding chairs against the wall when the sound of an engine cut through the night. Not a car, a motorcycle, running rough, the kind of rough that came from someone who didn't care how they treated a machine. Sierra froze by the sink, a dish towel still in her hands. Her face went pale in an instant, the color Carol had noticed earlier draining right out of her cheeks. That's him, she whispered. That's Caleb's bike. Viper set down the chair he was holding. Something cold moved through his chest, chasing away every bit of warmth the party had left behind. Take Hope upstairs, he said, his voice low and steady. Lock the door. Don't come down. Sierra didn't argue. She scooped Hope from the playpen in the living room, the baby already half asleep, and disappeared up the stairs 2 at a time. Patches moved toward the door with Viper. I got your back, he said. Stay behind me, Viper answered. The porch light caught Caleb as he stumbled up the front steps, and Viper barely recognized his own son. His eyes were bloodshot, his jacket hanging open, a bottle swinging loose in one hand before he dropped it on the porch boards. It shattered, but Caleb didn't even flinch. Where is she? Caleb said, his words slurring together. Where's my daughter? You need to leave, Viper said, standing square in the doorway, blocking any view into the house. You're drunk, Caleb. Go home. This is bull, Caleb said, jabbing a finger toward his father's chest. Everybody's talking about it. My kid, growing up here, calling you Grandpa, and I don't even get a say? His voice cracked, somewhere between rage and something raw underneath it. I heard she's living here, living with you, like you're some kind of hero. Sierra ran from you because you hurt her, Viper said. You know that. I know that. I want to see my daughter. Caleb's voice rose, echoing across the quiet yard. Sierra, get down here. Patches stepped up beside Viper. Son, you need to turn around and walk away. Nobody wants this tonight. But Caleb wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had locked on movement behind the curtains upstairs, a shadow that could have been Sierra checking the window. He lunged forward, shoving past his father's shoulder, trying to force his way into the house. Sierra. Viper caught his arm. That's enough. Caleb spun on him, fury twisting his face into something Viper barely recognized. Get off me. He wrenched free and stumbled toward the stairs, shouting Sierra's name again, reaching for the banister like he meant to climb up after her himself. Viper grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him back, putting his own body between his son and the staircase. You are not going up there. That was when Caleb swung. The punch caught Viper across the jaw, hard enough to snap his head to the side, hard enough that he tasted blood before he even registered the pain. He staggered back a step, catching himself on the doorframe, and for one long moment the whole world tilted sideways. Whoa. Whoa. Patches was already moving, along with two other brothers who'd been outside checking on the noise. They grabbed Caleb by the arms, hauling him back from the stairs as he thrashed and screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You'll regret this." Caleb roared, dragged backward across the porch, his boots scraping against the boards. "I'm getting a lawyer. I'm taking her to court. You hear me? I'll take hope away from both of you." Viper stood frozen in the doorway, one hand pressed to his jaw, blood trickling warm between his fingers. He watched his own son dragged off the porch, screaming threats into the night air, and felt something inside him crack wide open. Not from the punch. From the truth of it, finally undeniable. Standing right in front of him in his son's twisted, furious face. The morning light came in gray and thin through the kitchen window, the kind of light that made everything look tired. Viper sat at the table with a bag of frozen peas pressed against his jaw, the swelling already turning purple along his cheekbone. Every time he moved his mouth, pain shot up into his ear. Sierra came down the stairs slow, Hope balanced on her hip, still in her pajamas. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes going straight to the bruise. "You should let Patches look at that again," she said. "He already did. Says nothing's broken." Viper set the peas down on the table. "I've had worse." Sierra pulled out the chair across from him and sat, settling Hope onto her lap. The baby reached for a spoon left on the table, banging it against the wood, oblivious to the tension hanging in the room. "He wasn't bluffing," Sierra said quietly. "About the lawyer." Viper looked up at her. Caleb's mom, before she passed, left him some money. Not a lot, but enough to hire somebody good. Sierra's hands were shaking slightly as she held on to Hope. "And I don't have anything to fight him with. No steady job, no place of my own. I've been living here because you took us in, but a judge is going to look at that and see a woman who can't take care of her own baby." "That's not true, and you know it." "It doesn't matter what's true," Sierra said, her voice cracking. "It matters what looks true on paper. Caleb's going to stand up in that courtroom clean-shaven, in a nice shirt, and tell them I'm unstable. That I don't have a home, that I don't have a job." She swallowed hard. "And then he's going to bring up you." Viper went still. "Your record," Sierra said, barely above a whisper. "The old arrests, the club. He'll use all of it. He'll tell them Hope is growing up around bikers, around a man with a criminal past, and they'll believe him because it's easier to believe than the truth." Viper didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, scarred and rough, hands that had fixed 100 engines and thrown a few punches back when he was younger and angrier than he had any right to be. Hands that had held his son as a baby, once, a long time ago, before all of this. "I was young and stupid," he said finally. "Did some things I'm not proud of. Served my time. Been clean for 20 years. I know that," Sierra said. "But a judge who's never met you doesn't." The kitchen went quiet except for Hope's spoon hitting the table over and over, a small bright sound against the heaviness settling over the room. Viper stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the yard, at the porch where his son had shattered a bottle and thrown a punch just hours before. The string lights from the party were still up, sagging a little in the morning damp, looking foolish now in the daylight. "Maybe he's right," Viper said, his back still to her. "Viper. Maybe I'm the problem here." He turned around, and his face looked older than she'd ever seen it, the lines around his eyes deeper, the weight of something old and heavy dragging down his shoulders. "I raised that boy. Whatever he is now, whatever he did to you, some part of that started with me. And now I'm supposed to stand in a courtroom and convince a judge I'm the answer? A 45-year-old biker with an arrest record, going up against a story that makes sense to people who don't know any better? You're not the problem," Sierra said, her voice firmer now. "You're the reason we're safe." "Am I?" Viper's jaw tightened, and pain flared where the bruise was. "Or am I just another reason for a judge to say no? I could be the thing that sinks you, Sierra, not because of who I am now, but because of who I used to be." He shook his head, something hollow in his eyes. "Maybe you and Hope would be better off with somebody who doesn't come with all this baggage trailing behind them like a chain." The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Sierra barely slept. She'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. Every creak of the old house made her heart jump. Every time her phone buzzed, she froze, sure it was Caleb's lawyer. Or worse, Caleb himself. She started making lists in her head at 3 in the morning, all the ways a judge could see her. No job, no car of her own, no place that had her name on the lease. She'd bounced from foster home to foster home as a kid, and now here she was, 22 years old, still bouncing, still borrowing someone else's roof. What kind of mother did that make her look like? She held Hope tighter during those long nights, pressing her lips to the baby's soft head, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By the 4th day, dark circles had settled under her eyes like bruises of their own. She picked at her food. She jumped at loud noises. Once, when Hope let out a sharp cry from another room, Sierra dropped the dish she was washing, and it shattered on the floor, and she just stood there, staring at the pieces, unable to move, until the baby's cry faded into a coo, and she remembered how to breathe again. Viper wasn't much help. He'd retreated into himself, the way a turtle pulls into its shell when the world gets too sharp. He spent his days in the workshop, tinkering with an old engine that didn't need fixing, avoiding Sierra's eyes when they passed in the hallway. He told himself he was giving her space. Really, he was hiding from the truth Caleb had thrown in his face, the ugly little seed that had taken root and wouldn't stop growing. Maybe he was the reason for all of this. Maybe his blood was poison, and it had passed straight down into his son, and now it was threatening to poison Hope's future, too. He stopped coming by the main house for dinner. He stopped checking in on Sierra in the mornings. He told himself it was because he had nothing to offer her, no comfort that wouldn't ring hollow, no promises he could actually keep. Better to pull back now, he thought, than to let her lean on him and then watch him fail her in court. It was Patches who finally had enough. He found Viper at the clubhouse on a Thursday evening, sitting alone at the bar with a beer he wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. The place was quiet, just the hum of an old jukebox nobody had bothered to turn off. Patches pulled out the stool next to him and sat down heavy, the way a man sits when he's got something to say and doesn't plan on leaving until he's said it. "You look like hell," Patches said. "Thanks, that's not a compliment, Viper. That's a diagnosis." Patches waved down the bartender for a beer of his own, then turned to face his old friend square on. "You've been hiding out here for 3 days. Sierra's falling apart in that house, and you're in here nursing a beer you're not even drinking. I'm giving her space. You're giving her nothing." Patches's voice was sharp now, cutting through the fog Viper had wrapped himself in. "That girl came to you shaking, half frozen, with a baby in her arms, and you were the one who kicked down that door for her. You think she needs space right now? She needs you. She needs to see you standing next to her, not sulking in a bar feeling sorry for yourself." Viper's jaw tightened. "You don't understand, Patches. I could be the thing that sinks them. My record, my life, all of it, that's fear talking." Patches cut him off. "Fear and guilt, dressed up to look like wisdom. You've been telling yourself a story for 3 days, and it's a lie." He leaned in close, his voice dropping low, serious in a way Viper rarely heard from him. "You didn't stop being her family the day Caleb hit you. You think Dinah would sit here and watch you fold like this? You think she'd let you hide instead of fight?" The mention of his late wife's name hit Viper like a fist to the chest, harder than anything Caleb had thrown. "You swore to protect that baby," Patches said. "And that girl. Isolating yourself isn't protecting them, Viper. It's abandoning them. Same as what everybody else in their lives already did." Viper set his beer down and looked at Patches for a long moment. Something in his chest loosened, just a little, like a rusted bolt finally giving way. "Call the brothers," he said. "Tonight, tell them I need them at the clubhouse. All of them." Patches nodded, no questions asked, already pulling out his phone. By 8 o'clock, the clubhouse was full. Word had spread fast, the way it always did in the club, and men filed in wearing their cuts, faces serious, sensing this wasn't a party or a run being planned. Big Tom leaned against the pool table, arms crossed. Diesel and Whistler sat near the back, quiet, watching Viper with steady eyes. Frankie, the youngest patch holder, stood near the door like he was ready to be sent somewhere at a moment's notice. Even old Rooster, who rarely left his house these days, had come, cane in hand, settling into a chair near the front. Viper stood at the head of the room, and for the first time in days, he didn't look away from anyone. "I need to talk to you all about something hard," he started. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Some of you know already. Caleb's threatening to take Hope away from Sierra. Full custody. He's got a lawyer, money, and he's gonna use everything he can find against her. Against us." The room stayed quiet, waiting. "He's gonna use me too," Viper continued. "My record. This club. Everything people already think about us before they even know us. A judge sees patches and tattoos and a record from 30 years back, and he's gonna think the worst. I know how this looks from the outside." He rubbed a hand over his face, tired in a way that went bone deep. "I'm scared that just by being in that girl's life, I'm gonna be the reason she loses her daughter." Big Tom shifted off the pool table, frowning. "That's a load of garbage, and you know it." "Tom, no, let me finish." Tom stepped forward, his big frame casting a shadow across the floor. "You've been the most decent man in this club for 20 years. You've bailed half of us out of trouble more times than I can count. You rebuilt that house with your own 2 hands for a girl and baby that ain't even blood, until you found out they were. That ain't the record of a man who hurts people. That's the record of a man who saves them." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the room. Diesel nodded slowly. Whistler thumped his fist against his knee in agreement. "We'll stand up for you," Rooster said, his voice creaky but firm. "Every one of us. Character witness, whatever you need. Judge wants to know what kind of man you are, we'll tell him straight." Viper felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked tight since Dinah died. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't let himself hope for it. "I don't want any of you to feel like you gotta—" "Shut up, Viper," Frankie said from the doorway, grinning despite the seriousness of the moment. "We're doing it." That's final. Laughter rippled through the room, easing the tension just slightly, and Viper found himself almost smiling for the first time in days. Patches, who'd been quiet in the corner, finally spoke up. "There's something else," he said, stepping forward. "Might be bigger than character witnesses." Viper turned to him. "What are you thinking?" "Judge Harmon," Patches said. "You remember him?" Viper's brow furrowed, and then the memory surfaced, distant but clear, a rainy night on Route 9, years back. A car spun off the road into a ditch, an older man trapped inside, water rising fast. Viper had been the one to pull him out, break the window with his bare fist, drag him to safety before the ambulance even arrived. "He was a judge," Viper said slowly. "Retired now, I think. Still got connections," Patches said. "Still respected. He owes you his life, Viper. Man like that doesn't forget something like that. Might be worth reaching out, seeing if he'll help guide you through this, or at least point you toward someone who will." The room went still, everyone looking at Viper, waiting to see what he'd say. The house sat back from the road behind a row of tall oak trees, the kind of place that looked like it had been lived in by the same family for generations. White paint, black shutters, a porch swing that moved slow in the evening breeze. Viper parked his bike at the curb instead of the driveway, feeling like he needed to keep some distance, some respect for the man he was about to ask for help. He walked up the path in his cut, boots heavy on the wooden steps, and knocked before he could talk himself out of it. The door opened, and there stood Harmon Whitfield. Older now, silver hair thinner than Viper remembered, but the eyes were the same, sharp and clear behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Viper for a long moment, and something shifted in his face. Recognition dawning slow like sunrise. "Marcus Cole," Harmon said. "I wondered if I'd ever see you again." "Judge Harmon." Viper nodded, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. "Sorry to show up unannounced." "Nonsense," Harmon stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. Please." The inside of the house smelled like coffee and old books. Harmon led him to a study lined with shelves, motioned for him to sit in a leather chair across from a big oak desk. Viper sat carefully, feeling out of place among the neat rows of law books and framed diplomas, but Harmon didn't seem to notice or mind. "I think about that night sometimes," Harmon said, settling into his own chair. Route 9. Ice on the road. My car went into that ditch so fast I didn't even have time to be scared until the water started coming in. "I remember," Viper said quietly. "You broke the window with your fist," Harmon said, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it. "Pulled me out before I went under. I never even got your name that night. Took me 2 years to track you down and thank you properly. You didn't need to do all that." "I did," Harmon said firmly. "A man saves your life, you don't forget it. You don't let that debt go unpaid." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "So tell me why you're here, Marcus. Something's troubling you." Viper took a breath and told him everything, Sierra, Hope, the frozen doorstep, Caleb's rage and threats. The custody battle looming over all of them like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. He explained his fear, plain and honest, about how his record and his patches might be used against a young mother trying to keep her daughters safe. Harmon listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious as the story unfolded. When Viper finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment, just the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. "That poor girl," Harmon finally said. "And that baby, out in the cold like that." He shook his head slowly. "You did right by them, Marcus, same as you did right by me." "I don't know if right is enough," Viper admitted. "Not against a lawyer and money and a system that already looks at guys like me and sees trouble." Harmon's eyes hardened, not at Viper, but at the picture he was painting. "The system doesn't always look close enough," he said. "But I still have friends who do. People who care more about the truth of a person's character than the ink on their skin." He pulled a notepad closer, uncapping a pen. "I know a family law attorney, sharp as they come, fair too. She'll listen to Sierra's story and she'll fight for her, not just because it's a job, but because she believes in doing right by people who've been wronged." "You'd do that?" Viper asked, something loosening in his chest. "I already told you," Harmon said, writing down a name and number on the notepad, tearing off the sheet and sliding it across the desk. "A debt like that doesn't go unpaid. And if the court needs to hear about the character of your club, the toy drives, the community work, the way you all rallied around this young family, I'll speak to that myself." He looked up, meeting Viper's eyes steady and sure. "You saved my life once, Marcus. Let me help you save theirs." Viper drove home from Judge Harmon's house with the piece of paper folded careful in his vest pocket, like it might blow away if he wasn't careful with it. The sun was going down behind the trees, turning everything gold and soft, but his mind was on the hearing. Still weeks off, but already sitting heavy on his chest like a stone. He found Sierra in the kitchen when he got back, Hope asleep in the swing by the window, one small fist curled up by her cheek. Sierra had a cup of tea in front of her that had gone cold, untouched. She looked up when he came in, and something in her face told him she'd been waiting. "I got us a lawyer," Viper said, setting the paper on the table. "Judge Harmon knows her. Says she's good. Says she'll fight fair." Sierra nodded, but her hands were twisting together in her lap, and Viper had learned enough about her by now to know that meant something was coming. "There's something I need to show her," Sierra said. "Something I need to show you too, I guess. I should have said something sooner. Sierra, whatever it is, just let me get it." She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, and she disappeared down the hall to the room she shared with Hope. Viper sat there, listening to her footsteps, listening to Hope's soft breathing from the swing, and waited. When Sierra came back, she had an old phone in her hands, the screen cracked in one corner, and a small notebook with a worn cover. She set them both on the table like they weighed 100 pounds each. "I started keeping this about 4 months before I left him," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I didn't even know why at first. I started taking pictures. After the first time he hit me, I took a picture of the bruise on my arm before it faded. I don't know why. I told myself it was stupid, that I'd never use it, that I was being paranoid." She swallowed hard. "But I kept doing it. Every time. Pictures, and I saved the texts, the ones where he'd apologize, and the ones where he'd threaten me right after. I wrote down dates in this notebook. What happened. What he said. What I said. Some nights I'd just sit in the bathroom with the door locked and write it all down while he was asleep. Viper reached out slow and turned the phone over in his hands, careful, like it was something fragile. He didn't open it. That wasn't his to look at yet, not without her say so. How long you been carrying this around, not telling anybody? Since before Hope was born. Sierra's eyes filled up, but she blinked it back, jaw tight. I didn't even understand it myself until just now, saying it out loud. I think some part of me always knew I'd need proof, that nobody would believe me otherwise, that he'd twist it around, make it sound like I was crazy, or that I was the one who. She stopped, pressing her lips together. You're not crazy, Viper said. Firm. You're smart, smarter than I gave you credit for, and I already thought a lot of you. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but her eyes were still wet. I was so scared. Every single day. But some part of me kept saying, document it. Keep it safe, someday you'll need this. I didn't know if that day would ever come. I just knew I couldn't let it disappear. Viper looked at her for a long moment. This young woman who had survived so much and still found the strength to protect herself and her daughter in ways she hadn't even fully understood at the time. This is going to matter, he said. This is going to matter a lot, Sierra, but it's got to come from you. Not just handed over to some lawyer to read out loud. You need to be the one who tells it. Sierra's face went pale. Testify? Me? In front of him? You don't have to hide behind me. Or Patches. Or anybody else, Viper said gently. You've been carrying this whole thing alone for months, keeping your girl safe, keeping proof safe. All while he tried to break you down. You're stronger than you know. That judge needs to hear it from your mouth, not mine. Sierra sat back down slow, staring at the notebook and the phone like she was seeing them different now, not just as evidence, but as proof of her own strength. Okay, she said finally, quiet but sure. Okay, I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. She reached for the notebook and opened it, flipping through the pages of dates and details, and began to sort them out on the table, organizing her evidence. Her hand steady now instead of shaking. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old paper. Sierra sat at the table on the left side, her hands folded so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Viper sat right behind her, close enough that when her hand crept back looking for his, he took it without a word. His leather vest had been left in the truck. He wore a plain button-up shirt Patches had picked out for him, and it felt like wearing someone else's skin. Caleb sat across the room next to a lawyer in a gray suit who looked like he never once in his life had to worry about where his next meal was coming from. Caleb had cleaned up some. Hair combed, shirt tucked in. He didn't look at Sierra. He didn't look at Viper either. He stared straight ahead like a man rehearsing his own innocence. The judge, a woman named Reyes with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched on her nose, called the room to order. Caleb's lawyer stood first. He talked slow and smooth, the kind of voice built for convincing juries and judges alike. Your Honor, my client is simply asking for what any father would want, the chance to know his daughter. What we have here is a young mother with no fixed address for most of the last year, no steady employment, living now in a house owned by a man with a documented criminal history and ties to an organization known to law enforcement across 3 states. He said the words Hell's Angels like they left a bad taste in his mouth. We're not here to disparage anyone's lifestyle choices, he continued, but the court must consider what environment is truly stable for a child. An environment with motorcycle gatherings, men with records, a house that until recently sat boarded up and abandoned. My client has secured steady work, a clean apartment, and is prepared to provide consistency. Sierra's grip on Viper's hand tightened. He squeezed back, steady, and leaned close enough to whisper, "Let them talk. Your turn's coming." When Sierra's attorney called her to the stand, Sierra stood slow, smoothing down her blouse, with hands that shook just slightly. She walked to the witness box like she was walking toward something she'd been running from her whole life, and made herself sit. "Sierra," her attorney said gently, "can you tell the court what happened during your relationship with Caleb Cole?" Sierra's voice cracked at first, but she found it, like finding solid ground after months of walking on ice. "It started small," she said. "Little things. He'd get mad if I talked to other people too long. Then he started grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise if I disagreed with him. Then it got worse." She swallowed. "The first time he hit me, I was 7 months pregnant. He apologized after, said he'd never do it again. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." She reached into the folder in front of her and pulled out printed photographs, each one dated in careful handwriting on the back. "I started keeping records because some part of me knew nobody would believe me without proof. Here are photos of bruises. Here are texts where he threatened me the same night he apologized for the last time he hurt me." Her voice did not waver now. "I was so afraid of him finding this that I hid it in places I didn't think he'd look. I was more afraid of losing my daughter to him than I was of anything else in the world." The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers as the judge reviewed the evidence. Patches took the stand next, then 2 other club brothers, each one speaking plain and honest about the man Viper had become since Hope arrived. Baby monitors clipped to leather vests. Nights spent walking the floor so Sierra could sleep. A house rebuilt board by board with his own hands. Then Judge Harmon rose, dignified in his good suit, and spoke about the night on the highway years back when a stranger on a motorcycle had stopped in a storm to change his tire and refused any thanks. "Character isn't about the patches on a man's vest," he said. "It's about what he does when nobody's asking him to." When it was finished, Judge Reyes removed her glasses and looked over the courtroom, tired but thoughtful. "I've heard enough for today," she said. "This is not a decision I'll make lightly, and it deserves a clear head, not a rushed one. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. She struck her gavel once, and the sound rang through the quiet room like a held breath finally let go. The hallway outside the courtroom had hard wooden benches and a floor so shiny it looked wet. Sierra sat on the edge of one bench, her knee bouncing up and down, like she couldn't make it stop even if she tried. Her face had gone pale, the color of paper, and her eyes kept darting to the big clock on the wall. 8:47. "It's almost time," she said, mostly to herself. Viper stood a few feet away, rocking Hope gently against his shoulder. The baby had her fist stuffed in her mouth, drooling on his plain button-up shirt, and he didn't care one bit. He rubbed slow circles on her back, the same way he used to do decades ago when Caleb was small and couldn't sleep. "She's calm," Viper said, looking at Sierra. "You should try to breathe like her." Sierra let out a shaky laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I can't. What if the judge looks at everything and still decides Caleb deserves a chance? What if his lawyer's fancy words work? What if I lose her? Marcus. She'd started calling him Marcus a few weeks back instead of Viper. He noticed every time. "You won't lose her," Viper said, and his voice was steady even though inside his own chest felt like a fist was squeezing his heart. "You told the truth in there. That judge saw the real you, not what some lawyer painted on a wall." Patches sat on Sierra's other side, his big arms crossed over his chest, but his knee bounced just as much as hers. Around them, 6 more members of the Iron Cross chapter filled the hallway, taking up 2 benches and part of the wall, all of them dressed down in button shirts and clean jeans instead of their vests, looking like a group of men trying hard to be invisible and failing completely. Judge Reyes seemed sharp, Patches said. She wasn't falling for that lawyer's smooth talk. I watched her face. She wasn't buying what he was selling. "You don't know that," Sierra whispered. "I know people," Patches said. 40 years riding with rough men taught me how to read a room." She saw straight through it. The clock ticked to 8:55. Sierra stood up, sat back down, then stood again. Viper reached out with his free hand and caught hers, the same way he had done in the courtroom the day before, and held it tight. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "just for her, you did everything right. You were brave. Nobody can take that away from you, not even a judge." Her eyes filled up, but she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall before they had answers. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened. A clerk stepped out and called their case number. The group rose together like a single body and filed back inside, taking their seats. Caleb was already there, his lawyer beside him, both of them stiff and unreadable. Judge Reyes entered, and everyone stood, then sat when she gave the nod. She opened a folder in front of her and looked over the room with the same tired, thoughtful eyes from the day before. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented," she said, her voice even and clear. "This court finds that the documented pattern of abuse presents a clear and present danger to the well-being of the minor child, Hope Cole. Full legal and physical custody is awarded to the mother, Sierra Cole." Sierra's breath caught. Viper's hand tightened around hers. Furthermore, the judge continued, "This court issues a protective order against Caleb Cole. Any future contact with the child must be supervised and is contingent upon his completion of a court-mandated rehabilitation program and anger management counseling, verified by regular reports to this court." Caleb's shoulders dropped. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Caleb said nothing. Additionally, Judge Reyes said, looking now toward Viper, "Based on testimony regarding Marcus Cole's role in the child's life and well-being, this court formally grants him legal grandfather visitation rights, to be exercised at reasonable times agreed upon with the custodial parent." She struck the gavel. "This court is adjourned." The moment they stepped outside into the hallway, Sierra turned and threw her arms around Viper's neck, careful of Hope between them, and sobbed into his shoulder. Patches let out a whoop that echoed off the walls, and the rest of the brothers surrounded them, clapping backs, laughing, some wiping at their own eyes without shame. Hope, caught in the middle of it all, giggled and reached her small hands out toward the noise. Spring had come to Miller's Lane the way spring always does, slow and then all at once. The snow was long gone. Grass grew thick and green in the yard where weeds used to choke everything. The porch, once sagging and gray, stood straight and freshly painted, white with blue trim, the same blue as Hope's eyes. Balloons were tied to the railing, bouncing in the warm breeze. A banner hung across the porch that read "Happy Birthday Hope" in big, crooked letters, clearly made by hands more used to holding wrenches than paintbrushes. Patches had drawn a little motorcycle next to her name, and nobody had the heart to tell him it looked more like a potato with wheels. Cars and motorcycles lined the street, more than Miller's Lane had ever seen at once. Neighbors who used to cross to the other side of the road now walked right up the front path carrying casserole dishes and wrapped presents. Mrs. Higgins from 2 houses down brought a chocolate cake. The Iron Cross brothers brought a mountain of gifts, most of them stuffed animals bigger than Hope herself. Inside, the house smelled like vanilla frosting and fresh coffee. The living room, once dark and empty with plywood over the windows, was bright now, sunlight pouring through real glass. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, the same fireplace where Viper had once knelt to build up a dying fire with shaking hands. Now it crackled soft and low, more for comfort than survival. Hope sat in a high chair at the head of the table, wearing a paper crown that kept sliding down over one eye. She smacked her hands on the tray, giggling at the crowd of grown men in leather vests who leaned in close to make faces at her. "She's getting big," Patches said, holding a mug of coffee, watching her with the same soft look he always got around her. "Feels like just yesterday she was the size of a loaf of bread." "Feels like longer," Viper said. "Feels like she's always been here." Sierra moved through the room, laughing, thanking people for gifts, looking nothing like the pale, trembling girl who once sat frozen in a hospital hallway. Her cheeks had color now. Her shoulders sat straight. When she caught Viper's eye across the room, she smiled, and there was nothing scared left in it. Later, after the cake had been cut, and the last of the guests had trickled out with hugs and promises to come back soon, Viper found an envelope waiting on the kitchen counter. His name was written on the front, in handwriting he hadn't seen in over a year. Careful and slow, like the writer had thought hard about every letter. He stepped out onto the porch to read it alone. "Dad, I don't expect you to write back. I don't even know if you'll read this all the way through. But I'm in the program now, 6 weeks sober, and they make us write letters we might never send. I'm sending this one anyway. I know what I did to Sierra. I know what I did to you. I keep seeing your face that night. And I hate what I saw in mine. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. Maybe someday that means something. Maybe it doesn't. Either way is okay." Caleb Viper read it twice, then folded it slow and careful, the way you fold something you plan to keep. He didn't cry, not exactly, but his eyes burned and his throat felt tight. He tucked the letter into his shirt pocket, close to his chest, and stood there a long moment looking out at the yard, green and alive under the porch light. The door isn't closed, he thought. Not open all the way either. But not closed. Inside, Sierra was carrying a drowsy Hope toward the living room. "Somebody's ready for bed," she said, handing the baby over. "Rock her for me? I've got dishes." Viper settled into the rocking chair by the fire, Hope's small head tucked under his chin. On his vest, stitched crooked with careful, loving hands, sat a small patch that read Grandpa. Sierra had sewn it herself, laughing the whole time about her terrible stitching. The fire crackled. Hope's breathing slowed, soft and even. The frozen doorstep was warm now, and it stayed that way. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.